Well, good morning. I, Chair Shelley Bailey, call the Oregon Prescription Drug Affordability Board meeting of April 15th, 2026 to order at approximately 9:02 a.m. Pacific. Melissa, if you could please call roll.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Present.
Vice Chair Dan Hartung.
Present.
Lori Hoagland.
Here.
Dan Kennedy.
Present.
Michelle Coder.
Present. Sorry, I lost my mouse.
No worries. Chris Lehman.
Present.
John Murray.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you, Melissa. I would like to welcome everyone to today's meeting. Also wanted to share for those here today that we have an American Sign Language interpreter with us today. I know usually we put the information on the screen related to how, there we go, related to how to access the Zoom controls for individuals who are looking for the support from an American Sign Language interpreter. So please use the Zoom controls to access the interpretation channel. We now want to begin our agenda with conflict of interest declarations, which are stated each month according to board policies. So do members have any declarations of potential or actual conflict of interest? Have board members met with entities or individuals related to board activities? And have individuals or board members provided testimony to the Oregon legislature related to legislation? Mr. Murray, I have your hand is up, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. Under advisement of the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, I declare a potential conflict of interest due to my ownership of Murray Drugs Incorporated, comprised of 3 independent pharmacies in Eastern Oregon that have prime pharmacy services contracts with PBMs, insurance companies, and the state of Oregon. Thank you.
Mr. Murray, thank you for that information. I will also would like to disclose that on March 24th of 2026, I did meet with Polly, Senator Wyden's team related to different reform initiatives that Senate Finance is working on. There was no discussion related to Oregon PDAB, but I did want to disclose that I had that meeting with the senator's team. So now that I don't see any other hands raised, I do want to ask board members if you have any corrections to draft minutes from the March 18th, 2026 meeting. And me not seeing anyone who would like to make a correction, I would like to reference that since there are no corrections or changes to the minutes, that the minutes are automatically approved. So I would now like to call on Sarah Young, Executive Director of Oregon PDAB, to provide us with a program update. Sarah, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey, and good morning, members of the board. As a recap, in March and April, the PDAB team has been focusing on first updating and publishing the 2025 Drug Review Report with the final edits that were approved by the board, and distributing that report to the legislative committees and the Healthcare Cost Growth Target Program as directed by our statute. And of course, it is also publicly available on our website. So anyone who hasn't had a chance to read that report, I encourage you to go there and get your own copy. After the report, we have been doing a lot of work to prepare for this 2026 drug review cycle. We have been working with our DFR colleagues to issue the data call to health insurance carriers to collect information about the calendar year 2024 claims, coverage, and price concessions in the commercial market for those 12 specific prescription drugs that the board selected for the affordability reviews in 2026. We also posted feedback forms for stakeholders to share their input about the drugs currently under review to the PDAB website. If anyone is interested in providing their input to the board to inform the review process, please go to the PDAB website and access the stakeholder feedback forms from the feedback forms link, which is prominently available in the navigation bar on the left-hand side. Um, we've also the staff also did a bunch of work developing the methodology that we will discuss in today's meeting to analyze the drugs in the 2026 review process that have FDA orphan designation for the treatment of rare diseases or conditions. That's what orphan designation is. And also have FDA approvals to treat other common diseases. We have also continued the planning and promotion for the community forums in April and May. And I want to thank the board members for letting us know which community forums you will attend. And please let Melissa know if your schedule changes or if you have any questions at all about logistics for the forums. The first one of those is coming up on April 28th. That will be a virtual Zoom forum. And we are looking forward to this series of community meetings to really have a chance to hear directly from patients and consumers about their experiences around drug prices. DFR issued a press release about the forums on April 9th, and thank you to our communications colleagues and everyone who helped get that out and just helping make people aware of these opportunities. And of course, see the slide on the screen as well as the PDAB website for the flyer with the details of times and connection information for all 7 of the events. At the same time, the drug price transparency team has been working on finalizing the billing categories and fees for the 2026 manufacturer assessment. We've sent email reminders to all of the registered manufacturer representatives that their assessment is posted to their account, and those are due beginning of June. The annual price increase reports for price changes in 2025 are due from the manufacturers today. And as a reminder, this was an extended due date for the 2026 reporting cycle because to accommodate those system changes and the other things coming out of the resolution of the litigation. And the team will review those annual price increase reports that are submitted in IREG. And once those reports are complete, the non-trade secret information, as a reminder, will be viewable to the public through our online price transparency website. The price transparency program is also preparing for the insurance carrier reports that DPT receives for 2025 claims. That's due from the carriers May 1st. And as a reminder, those reports to DPT will be the basis for PDAB's work in next year's cycle after the DPT team has had a chance to review the data and perform quality control checks. So that's kind of how some of our data pieces fit together. I also wanted to let the board know that I attended the quarterly Health and Human Services Tribal Cluster meeting with other state program managers on April 1st in Warm Springs to present information about the Oregon PDAB. A big thank you to the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation who hosted the meeting and to all of the tribal leaders who participated. It was a really interesting conversation. For folks' awareness, Governor Kotak signed House Bill 4040 last week, which for PDAB officially gives the board more flexibility regarding the designation of insulin products. And then looking ahead to today's meeting, we look forward to really a good discussion and feedback from board members about the methodology and analytic approach for this year's drug reviews that we will be talking about. We really need your questions and suggestions and guidance to make sure that we are producing what you need to inform your work and inform the board's decision making. Also, please be thinking about the drug review reports and the rubric tool from last year. And again, let us know about any changes that would help improve those tools and help you as board members in this year's review process. After that discussion about are components of our upcoming review process. We will have a presentation and a discussion with Trevor Douglas about the Oregon Prescription Drug Program and the ArrayRx cooperative procurement work, and then Dee Weston will present on Oregon Medicaid and how Medicaid drug purchasing works. And I am really looking forward to these conversations today. And with that, Chair Bailey, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
Oh, come off mute. Sarah, thank you very much for the program update. I did want to share with everyone now that we are moving to the public comment period of the meeting. The board received 5 letters, which are posted to the website. I am going to go ahead and read the letters we received to the website in order here. Tiffany Westrick Roberson and Vanessa Latham, 2 letters each from the Each and Pick Coalitions. Terry Lee and Kristen O'Neill from Merck. From Heather Kaysen from Pharmaceutical Care Management Association, PCMA. And from Robert Nolan from the Arthritis Foundation. And this is for general public comment period. The board received 2 requests to speak, so I will call on the individuals and ask them each to speak and state their name and organization. Each individual will be given 3 minutes to speak. The board will not deliberate on issues or requests during this time. So the first individual I have here on my list is Daria McGrew from Pharma. Daria, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity. For the record, Daria McGrew on behalf of Pharma. We remain concerned with the board's shift in approach contemplating affordability reviews of drugs with FDA orphan designation, even when those drugs are also approved for non-orphan indications. The PDAB statute, we believe, clearly and categorically exempts orphan designated drugs from affordability review. We believe that this language is unambiguous. It exempts drugs that are designated. It does not exempt specific indications. The board's proposed approach conflicts with the plain text of the law, exceeds the board's statutory authority, conflicts with the board's own regulations, and raises serious APA concerns. As you move forward, we ask the board to clarify whether and if other data elements in the review dossier can be consistently parsed by designation, such as price concessions and utilization management, information reported by carriers, and data published on health equity impacts. From a practical standpoint, the board has recognized it may be able to parse designations for some but not all drugs because of APAC pharmacy claims, because they lack diagnostic information. As a result, if the board decides which drugs to review based on sortable and available data, this creates a risk of inconsistent and unfair treatment among drugs, rather than a principled policy basis for excluding or including drugs for review. We will follow up this information with a written comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGrew. The next individual that I have on our list here today is Carolina Sommer from the Rare Disease Alliance. Carolina, if you are here, welcome, and you have the floor.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Carolina. I'm here today as a rare disease parent and the co-founder of the Rare Disease Alliance. Thank you for this opportunity to speak as you continue your important work at the Oregon PDAB. So rare disease families do not live typical lives. Our medical journeys are complex and our evidence is limited. And our timelines are very different from more common conditions. Today, about 1 in 10 people live with a rare disease, and yet 95% of rare diseases still have no FDA-approved treatment. When a therapy does become available, it often represents years of research, enormous risks, and sometimes the only treatment option a patient will ever have. I recognize the difficult responsibility this board carries in balancing affordability with maintaining access to needed therapies, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness of that work. As you know, your policy set reimbursement limits within the healthcare system, which can influence how providers are able to deliver care. Hospitals and pharmacies must purchase, store, and administer these medicines, all of which carry real costs. If reimbursement is set below those costs, then providers may experience financial losses when delivering care. In those situations, smaller community hospitals, specialty pharmacies, or clinics operating on tight margins may find it difficult to continue offering the therapy. So even when a policy does not change what the patient pays, it can influence whether treatment is available locally. For rare disease patients, that access can be life-changing. Oregon law thoughtfully included protections for rare disease therapies, recognizing that these treatments often serve very small patient populations and may be the only available option. Families like mine already spent years searching for a diagnosis, coordinating care, and supporting breakthrough research that leads to new treatments. For our community, the arrival of a therapy is an extraordinary milestone. So rare disease families are not asking for a special treatment. We just simply hope that as this board continues its work, that the protections already in Oregon law are implemented in the way that ensures patients with the fewest options can maintain access to the therapies they depend on. Thank you for your time and considering the perspective of rare disease patients and families.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I would now like to call on PDAB staff to provide us with a presentation of the data methodology for the board's 2026 drug reviews. And I guess before we get started, I also want to announce for the record that we'll probably take a 5-minute break in the 10 a.m. to 10:15 a.m. Pacific window for those who are marking it on your calendars. So welcome PDAB staff.
Good morning, Chair Bailey. I'll jump in. Kay and Heather have both worked diligently to develop methodologies to ensure that the data sets that are going to be reviewed in this upcoming review are aligned with what was previously implemented from the prior review. I'm going to introduce Kay. She will review the methodology that to bring in the review for orphan drugs and how orphan drug claims are going to be removed, and then how we're going to utilize the rest of those claims within the rest of the data set. So, Kay, if you can come on camera and share the screen and we'll start the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yes. Hello. Courtney, should I just jump straight into the orphan presentation? You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, let's just review the roadmap real quick and to discuss what, if you could scroll up a little bit. Thank you for sharing the slide deck. So we've been following the roadmap. We've been trying to present this every board meeting so that the board has a conceptual idea of where we're at and what we're going to be doing. Again, thanks to all the board members who worked so diligently to get that 2025 review report done. That was a big success for us. And then last month, we went through and identified the subset list. So we are now reviewing 12 drugs, 8 standard drugs, 2 orphan drugs, and then 2 insulin products. So going forward right now, the subset list is out to the carriers under the data call. And once that comes back the first part of May, the team will analyze it and we'll start putting that information into the data pack material, with the intention for the first review to be conversation to start in June, and then that would be the anti-diabetics. And if you recall, the last subset, or from the last subset drugs, anti-diabetics were the last conversation on the material packet. So it's going to be kind of a nice integration from the drugs that were previously reviewed, because many of them are also the continuation of a secondary review. So basically, you're just looking at cost comparisons from year over year and seeing if there's any market changes significantly from the 2023 data and the 2024 data. So the intention is for those drugs to be implemented or reviewed in June. July, we'll review one of the orphan drugs, have hopefully a strong conversation about how that looks analytically, with a couple other of the standard drugs, and then another set will be in August, with September and October being a more cumulative conversation about all the drugs, determining if any of the drugs need to be just fall off, or if we're going to go through and vote on each one at the end like we did this last time. So however the board wants to set up that decision-making process, we'll continue to have those conversations. And I apologize, the one thing that I did not include on this was the structure to start talking about policy recommendations. We'll start that also probably in June, just to start getting those concepts of the policy, so I can start making policy memos and doing the research ahead of time, so we're not waiting the last few months before we need to make those decisions for the policy recommendations. So we're hoping to include policy conversations alongside these drugs that you'll be reviewing. And again, Melissa, our admin, has done an outstanding job putting together the public outreach forums. I really hope that that creates a strong narrative of how these drugs are impacting the community. We understand that that is kind of a more challenging data point within our material, and we're hoping that this round will at least provide some more insight of what's happening in the health equities of the communities of patients that take these drugs. And as Sarah had mentioned, we do have the online forms. These are surveys, feedback information that cover the primary stakeholders for the under our statute. And of course, that includes the patients and caregivers, individuals with scientific medical background. So that includes your physicians, your pharmacists, anybody like researchers. Really want to get anybody who prescribes the medication. We really appreciate your insight on how the prescribing of these medications also impact how patients are taking them. And then we also have 340B clinics or health quality clinics that if you can please provide the overall review of how patients access these drugs under clinic support. And then of course, the manufacturers, PBMs and payers. I really, really appreciate any insight or structure. I know that there's sometimes that concern regarding confidentiality or trade secret. We're not asking for that. We're just trying to get a better insight about how your industry or your component of the industry supports or how it feeds through the rest of the supply chain. So again, this is kind of a overall cumulative perspective that we're trying to gather to provide as much information to the board members around these. Again, this is kind of the lacking of what was happening from last year. Hopefully these questions and these surveys will shore up a lot of that missed information that we really weren't able to successfully capture last year. And then we do not have an extension this year, which means there's a lot of conversations in a small amount of time because the report has to be done by December. So the vote has to be done in December. So there will be times when I'm going to need to reach out, or staff will reach out to board members independently to ask for additional information and structure and how we can set up these to be as successful as possible. So I, again, really appreciate the collaboration between staff and board members and your guidance and how we're going to set this up to hopefully be one of our more successful review processes. So before we move on, is any questions regarding kind of the roadmap or the structure over the next till the end of the year? Yes, Chris.
It's not a question, Courtney. It's just a thank you about the policy, incorporating the policy discussions earlier in the year. I think you taking the feedback from the board that we felt kind of a little bit rushed at times with the policy decisions. I really appreciate that we're going to start those conversations earlier and yeah, have it go throughout the year. So thank you.
Yes, and I will be developing kind of a new progress for that. It is my intention to again start the conversation, collect initial thoughts, and then do kind of what I did with the other drugs where I developed the policy memos. So there's a little more structure and understanding how these drugs can be impacted through either the state system, policy, or get even down to patients in the healthcare system as it goes through. So it's important for me to get ahead of that so I can write these memos for that educational reason. So again, this is going to start being one of our top conversations as the meetings go on. So thank you for acknowledging that. All right, well, if I have no other questions, I'm going to pass it over to Pei. Pei, thank you again for pulling up the roadmap. Appreciate you letting me talk about that, but let me know when I can come back on and talk about the other stuff.
Sounds good. So we're going to talk about the orphan condition drugs and the methodology that we used to be able to examine and analyze these orphan drugs. So first we're going to talk about the all payer all claims, or the APAC database. Just an overview, APAC provides one of the foundational information sources that the PDAB uses to understand drug spending and utilization trends in Oregon. APAC is essential to PDAB for analyzing gross spend of drugs in the state of Oregon. And APAC is the only statewide all payers claims database available, and our use of APAC is mandated by our statute. And also, I would like to call attention that APAC analyzes the gross spend of drugs, so it does not include rebates. And PDAB is allowed to use public net price estimates. But APAC itself does not have those net spend estimates. And the APAC database contains administrative health data submitted by insurers, including enrollment, medical, pharmacy claims, and provider information. So yeah, it does include insurer reported allowed amounts, but it does not include list price in APAC. And that is something that we look into separately. A little bit more about APAC. So APAC includes insurance coverage information, health service costs, medical and pharmacy utilization data, and it roughly represents 92% of Oregon residents based on 2018 data. And APAC does not include uninsured individuals or individuals covered in federal programs, small commercial insurers and third-party insurers with fewer than 5,000 enrollees, and some self-insured plans that are not required to report. And then going over some relevant APAC data fields in orphan methodology. APAC is split into medical claims and pharmacy claims. So under the medical claims, these are some data elements used to analyze medical services associated with drug administration. So it includes the unique person OHA ID, which is the same across medical and pharmacy claims for the same patient. And it also includes birth year, NDCs, ICD-10s, and file year. There's obviously more data fields, but these are the ones that we're going to focus on for today. And the pharmacy claims, which are data elements used to analyze prescription dispensing and utilization. It also includes the unique person OHA ID, birth year, NDCs, and file year. There are some data limitations to APAC, and the first one is that medical claims, they may not always include NDCs for physician-administered drugs. And then another limitation would be that pharmacy claims do not always, they do not include ICD-10 codes.
And Dan, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right forum, but I was just had a question about the medical claims and how you're indicating that not all drugs billed in the medical claims don't have NDCs, and so historically drugs were often billed in medical claims using like J codes or CPT codes. And sometimes there's a delay in issuing those codes by payers and things like that as the drug was released. But I was curious if any of you, I've previewed some of the slides here, and what proportion of the time, do you have any visibility into those CPT or J codes for these drugs in cases where NDCs aren't submitted?
Sarah, would you have more insight on that?
I am afraid I don't.
It's a pretty technical question,
Yeah.
so maybe not be the
That's
right
what we're here
forum.
for.
Yeah.
This is
Mhm.
absolutely the right forum to raise the questions. We may not be able to answer all of them, but let's raise them now and we can go do additional research on them.
Mr. Murray?
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I was asked to look at some of the claims that we have in our community pharmacy and whether the pharmacy claims, especially electronic claims, which most all claims are nowadays, very few hand-carried prescriptions anymore from patients, if they included ICD-10 codes. And I was surprised to find that about 1/3 of the claims that came to us had ICD-10 codes on them, or at least an abbreviated form of them. And so, and where it is, some prescriptions nowadays require it, like GLP-1s, if they're going to be covered by your insurance plan, some of them require an ICD-10 code indicating diabetes. And so it's becoming more, I guess it's more accepted. It's certainly available. We use SureScripts primarily for electronic prescription receiving. I know there might be other formats out there, but I was interested to see that some claims that didn't require it, well, many actually had ICD-10 codes on them. Many of them were Schedule II medications for pain management and things like that, but there were other ones too. And then there were other ones that did not. So I'd say it's probably a 1/3, 2/3 split. So it's technology that probably is available. I'm not sure how the providers might like that or not, but I think that it is out there in some form or another.
Thanks for sharing that practical experience, John. It's helping us understand the data.
Michelle?
Your mute button's still
Sorry,
misbehaving.
technical difficulties. So providers can attach an ICD-10 to a prescription, but it is not a required field. That's why you see ICD-10s on some prescription claims and not on others.
And I believe in some states, and I've not had it down this path from a policy perspective, but some states have a requirement to put ICD-10 on the scripts. Just Oregon isn't one of them at this time. I think the other piece related to Dr. Hartong's question would also be what data elements did we request in the data call? So for, while the data might be there, I guess to Michelle's point that it's not required by law, I guess it just depends on what's being fed into the data.
So I think it's, if I could address that a little bit, Chair Bailey, and then I see Michelle has another comment to make. It's important to, and we will talk next about the data call data and how we get that structured. But it's important to keep in mind that we have the APAC data and the data call data in different formats. For one thing, for APAC, staff have access to row level, claim level data. We don't have that granularity of data from the commercial data call. So that's an important distinction about how we do the analysis. And, currently, pharmacy claims both in APAC and our understanding, talking to some of the carriers, that in some of the formats the carriers have in their systems as well, frequently don't have ICD-10 codes. We're still trying to learn how often that happens or doesn't. So that's part of what we are learning. And Michelle, did you have something else?
Sorry, no additional comment. Thank you.
Thanks for your questions, everyone, and take it away, Pei.
Oh, Courtney.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of go back to Dan's question. Because of how much information comes from APAC and the process of how we access that information, we don't typically get the J code information from APAC. It is in APAC, but we don't request that information because it's another layer, and the NDC seems to be the most crosswalkable. I guess it's the easiest button for us. Now, if it comes down to we're finding that we need that additional layer through the J codes, and we can go back and request that from APAC. But as it is in our data set that we have, we do not have the J codes in it. And that just happens to be, it's not like we have a database that's connected into APAC. We have to receive that information and download it and put it in a spot. And it's a very, very large file. So that's, one of the challenges is that we don't have like direct insight. Everything we do through APAC, we have to make a request. So we try to ensure that the information we get is as meaningful as possible. However, as time goes on and we find that that would be another layer of information that is, necessary for these review process, then we'll start looking at that. So hopefully that clarifies your question a little bit, that it's just, it has to do with the data capacity right now for us.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can appreciate that. I just like from a historical perspective, the attachment of NDCs to medical claims is, I think, a relatively recent development, and it's been included for the collection of rebates for medical claims has been really what's been driving it. And so the J codes for drugs would be in the procedure code field for medical claims. And so if that's in the data that we request, that should be a fairly straightforward addition to any sort of query in terms of identifying drugs in the medical claims. So that's just, I'll leave it there. We can talk offline later about stuff.
We can do that. All right, Faye, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So moving on to one of our orphan drugs, Skyrizi. Skyrizi only has one orphan designation, which is the treatment of Crohn's disease in pediatric patients. However, most of its use is for non-orphan conditions like psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis in adult patients. How we went about isolating orphan claims was using birth year. So any Skyrizi claims with a patient born on or after January 1st, 2007 in the FA year 2024 are removed because those patients are considered pediatric. And using that filter, 21 APAC claims were removed from review. And of those 21 claims, it was filed by 11 unique patients with at least one claim. And then for non-orphan Skyrizi claims, it represents all other Skyrizi utilization not linked to orphan indication. That leaves 9,111 claims for review and with 2,595 unique patients with at least one claim. And then I'm going to show a flow chart of the Skyrizi claims. So of the medical claims, there are 947 total Skyrizi claims. And there were 12 orphan condition claims. That leaves us 935 non-orphan medical claims. And for the pharmacy side, we had 8,185 to begin with for Skyrizi pharmacy claims, and 9 orphan condition claims were removed from that, and that results in 8,176. And then the combination of those, the medical and the pharmacy, gives us the 9,111 non-orphan claims for drug review. Is there any, Dr. Hartung?
Oh, I was just curious if you had a sense of like how many patients are in total and how many patients were removed because of orphan designation.
Yeah, so there were 11 patients that were removed because of orphan designation, and in total there was 2,595 patients. Or sorry, that 2,595 was for the non-orphan.
Sorry, I missed that.
That's okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Pei, I had a question on the methodology. If you scroll down a little bit, I didn't catch the fact that not all medical claims have an NDC. So if you don't have a J code and you don't have an NDC, how are you identifying that claim on the medical side as a pharmacy related claim?
I believe currently we don't have those claims, Chris. Kind of looking at Courtney or Heather to correct me if I'm saying anything wrong. But again, the APAC data we have is the data where we could identify drugs being prescribed by the ICD-10, no, by the NDC codes. Too many acronyms.
Well, and for clarification, so Skyrizi, and this is the portion of the orphan drug consideration that when we look at orphan drugs, most of the methodology will probably be very specific to a drug. So like Skyrizi, we only remove the age, right? So I think with how Skyrizi is, we didn't dive into the ICD-10s or any
I'm
of
not,
the.
yeah, so sorry, I'm not talking about IC. My question is, oh, okay.
Yeah, so what I'm getting at is that because for medical claims, we first identified the ICD-10s and then pulled out the NDCs if there was an association. So for Skyrizi, we didn't do that because we were looking at that age removal, not like in Keytruda where we were more defined with looking at the NDCs.
I think Chris is kind of I think you may be a step back actually, Chris, that you're asking about potentially how many medical claims included a treatment with that drug that we didn't capture because they didn't have the NDC.
Yeah, so maybe their 947 is actually an underestimate. If you have claims that where the center or the physician office was submitting it with a J code instead of an NDC, if you're pulling those 947 based on, I think this is what you were saying, Dan, like there may be claims in that data that you're missing because the NDC wasn't submitted with the claim. Is that what you were trying to get at, Dan?
Yeah, yeah. If we're not looking at J codes or we may be
and there's
missing.
no NDC, then that number could be bigger.
Yeah. And I don't know. This seems to be mostly self-administered, and so maybe there's not that much going out in medical clinics, but I don't know. But just yeah.
But
yeah.
for the next one, that's going to matter a lot. And Courtney,
Yes.
to Dan's point, we don't need to get way in the weeds. I could follow up with you too to kind of articulate what we're trying to explain, but I now get what Dan was trying to say.
I think we understand what you're trying to say, which is
there's another layer for the
there's another layer
CPA
of claims that we don't currently have.
Yeah, we just don't have it. Not on our side. We can request it from APAC, but then again, not going to delay anything. And so, you know, again, but most of this is based off of a proxy, and the data is what we've been able to develop from a kind of a rational standpoint. Right, the J codes was kind of a element that we didn't consider at the time just because we've had other prior experiences with trying to deal with J code stuff, and that crosswalk between trying to get the J codes to the NDCs was not relevant at the time that we looked at it. So that's why we never went back and requested the J codes to come into through the data for us to analyze. So, but maybe that's something we should look into for our next request for APAC information if we, you know, as far as if we're going to be looking at orphan designations.
You may in fact have it because it's typically submitted into the procedure code variable, and so which is like very standard in a medical claims extraction, because that's basically how the kind of medical practice is reimbursed. And so you know, it's like the ICD-10 and then the procedure code, and then the J code would be in the procedure code. So just an aside, we may already have it. It's just a matter of just kind of pulling in the identifying the J codes, which is, you know, for these drugs, it's probably just a few different codes that are, you know, you can pull from the internet or whatever. So, but again, digression.
No worries. We
We
We'll look into that.
Yeah, we'll look into it. We'll take this back to the team and see what else we can learn about APAC data, which, as you know, is complicated, and we're still learning how to best use it. But I think that the takeaway here is, for the claims that we currently have and know we can analyze, these are the claims for this drug that we identified from Oregon's 2024 claims data, that we were able to identify using the indices for this drug in both the medical and pharmacy claim sets. So we'll continue to explore what we can learn about medical claims that don't have indices listed, and we'll report back to the board what we learned there. Any other questions on this specific methodology for Skyrizi that Pei has presented? Great. Go ahead, Pei.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So moving on to Keytruda. It's a little bit more complicated, but Keytruda is a physician-administered drug, so it's usually paid through the medical benefit and mostly comes through the medical claims, which means the majority of claims include ICD-10 diagnosis codes. And with the ICD-10s, it enables us to do condition level identification. And then moving on from that, we identify the orphan conditions, and we map the FDA orphan designations to corresponding ICD-10 codes. APAC does not identify FDA orphan designations directly. The board applies its own mapping. And listed here are just some of the orphan conditions and some of the ICD-10s associated. The asterisk represents all codes containing the characters before the asterisk. For example, C43 asterisk includes C43.01, C43.02, and so on. The next slide will have the full list of orphan designations and their ICD-10 codes for Keytruda. And then for the analysis, we use the ICD-10 codes to filter and separate the orphan designated use from the non-orphan utilization. And that allows us to focus on affordability analysis on a broader population impact based on the non-orphan utilization of Keytruda. And here is the list of the orphan conditions that we identified for Keytruda through the FDA and their associated ICD-10 codes.
Any comments or questions about that list, that condition list? Seems pretty straightforward. Thank you, Pei.
So for the orphan Keytruda claims, they were identified using the ICD-10s. Any Keytruda medical claims with any of the ICD-10s that were shown before is removed from the total claims. And for the pharmacy side, any Keytruda pharmacy claims with the same OHA unique person ID of the medical claims with the orphan ICD-10s is removed from the total claims. So with that methodology, about 1,281 claims with orphan conditions were removed, and that comes out to be about 202 unique patients with at least one claim. And then the rest of the claims are the non-orphan Keytruda claims, and it represents all other Keytruda utilization not linked to a designated orphan condition. And that comes out to be about 10,715 claims to review, coming from 1,595 unique patients with at least one claim. Is there any questions about this slide? Dr. Hartung?
So Keytruda identified in pharmacy claims to identify the orphans. We linked it back to the medical claims to look at ICD-10s for that specific patient. A comment from, I think, from the last board meeting was related to the fact that my understanding is in APAC medical claims, where we only have the medical claims for claims that are where drugs are administered, and not just kind of the whole gamut of other health services that are rendered essentially. And so if that's true, I guess my concern is that we're missing potentially a very large tranche of medical claims that could identify different diagnoses for patients, because basically if they're getting it, especially for this in this scenario, if they're getting it on the pharmacy side, maybe to administer at an infusion clinic or whatever, then they're not getting it on the medical side, but they may have a variety of different medical ICD-10 codes that we just have no visibility on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so let me move on to the next slide before I answer your question, because I think it will clear things up a little bit. So there were only 4 pharmacy claims for Keytruda overall for the year 2024. And I did go look up the OHA unique person ID for these claims back into the medical claims, and all of these claims have matching medical Keytruda claims that had ICD-10s in them.
Okay. So I guess it would be more important for a drug that has more if there's diversity of utilization across both medical and pharmacy, then that would be a more important consideration.
Yeah,
And-
but oh, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
And I think that's a really good point, Dan, for thinking about what methodologies we might use for other drugs. Again, they, as you say, had more diverse administration routes. For this particular drug, there was clearly very little activity on the pharmacy claim side, and Pei was able to confirm that all of those patient IDs also linked to activity that we had data on through medical claims.
Chris?
Hey, I had a question on the first Keytruda slide.
This one or the previous?
The I think one more. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this one. Oh, sorry. Yes. So where you said that the majority of claims, so under number 1, the bullet that says that the majority of claims include ICD-10, is that so on the medical benefit side, we had Keytruda claims that didn't include the ICD-10?
Oh, sorry, that was just a comment about the medical claims in general. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So for the specific Keytruda claims we were looking at, they had ICD-10s.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Lori, you also have your hand up.
I think that was already answered, but basically there were no Keytruda claims that didn't have an ICD-10 code. Is that correct?
That we examined. All of the claims that all the claim numbers that I presented include ICD-10 codes.
And just
you eliminate them if they didn't have the ICD-10 code.
I don't think, I think all of the claims that you were able to identify with an NDC, a national drug code, also had an ICD-10 code.
Yeah.
On the medical claim.
Yes, they did.
I mean, back to our previous discussion, the thing that we don't fully know about the APAC data is to what extent there are drug administrations that are not identified in the current APAC data with a national drug code on the claim. So that's a different asterisk.
We're going to go back to the flow chart. This is the last slide of the orphan drug methodology, and just breaks down the number of claims on, of Keytruda on the medical and pharmacy side. Like we said before, only 4 of those claims of the 10,715 for review are from the pharmacy side, and all the rest of them are from the medical side.
These 2 drugs, just in general, as board members, as you're thinking about understanding our APAC data and what we can learn from analyzing APAC data for all of the drugs, not just Keytruda and Skyrizi, kind of think about how these patterns might play out for different drugs that treat different kinds of conditions, because something that we'll be working on for this year's analysis is for all of the drugs where we can identify both pharmacy and medical claims. We will include both of those sets of claims in the analysis for the drug review. And Pei or Courtney, please correct me. My understanding is last year's data analysis was more limited on the medical claims side, or not?
I think that had to do with NDC collection.
The
Is that
NDC
right,
issues?
Courtney?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it was the collection of it, but we didn't have any limitations with NDC or any of the medical
As long as
side.
we had it. Okay. So that part will be similar to last year. But it's good for us to keep in mind that different drugs may have different patterns in how they're administered. Thank you for that careful walkthrough, Pei. Any other questions about these methodology?
All right, then I can jump into the next round of the conversation or has confidence in how we're going to look at the orphan drug. And again, I want to give a lot of appreciation for Pei's ingenuity, the time that she spent really looking at how this methodology can come together, that we can start looking at orphan conditions or drugs with have designated orphan conditions, because within our training report that was submitted last year, Skyrizi was one of the primary top contenders of highest cost impact. And to see that just because it had, the age restriction due to the pediatric limitation, so being able to come forward this time and having a methodology so that you can really see what's going on with this drug based off of the non-orphan conditions. So I'm really looking forward to see what Skyrizi has to do and how you're going to review that information. So again, thank you, Pei, for all your hard work and creativity and methodology for this. I just want to give you a moment of that recognition. So the data call, I know we say that word a lot, but maybe there's a really strong understanding of what that data call represents, because it's one of those background materials that staff usually engages with the most to collect the additional information from the subset drugs that were selected. So again, process goes, the drugs come in through the drug price transparency program. They're provided after quality assurance review to the PDAB. We create that preliminary list. You review that preliminary list based off of certain structures, you narrow the drugs down, and you get to that subset list. Once we have that subset list, those subset drugs, so the 12 drugs, go back to the reporting carriers, the commercial carriers that reported into DBT, to collect additional information from commercial insurers so that we can kind of bridge the gap of what's going on more granularly with the drugs under review. And that comes through the data call. And so the data call is a little more methodical. There's a lot of time in trying to ensure that the information really meets the statutory requirements, or at least provides some sort of benchmarking against what we pull from APAC. So again, as Kay said, APAC is your gross, and the data call information is the net. Understanding that the carrier information is a small component of the overall market. I think it's like only like 30% or so that's covered under the commercial information, but it's enough information that you can see generally what is happening in the within the carrier supply chain and the access, the coverage that people under commercial plans have access to, or the struggles with the coverage. So through that, I'm going to kind of just talk through it. Kay, if you can go to the next slide for me. So these are the tabs of information that we collect. So within this sheet, and I don't have it online, or I don't have it to present to you because it's very overwhelming. I didn't want it to confuse the conversation. So I just put in here just the tab names, and I'm going to go over kind of what each tab represents. So of course we have the split out between pharmacy and medical claims. Just like what we have in APAC, we have our pharmacy and medical claims. Pharmacy and medical claims for APAC, again, that's your gross. The pharmacy medical claims and the data carrier call is going to be the net information coming in. So those are kind of, again, they may not be apples to apples, but they're at least within the same fruit baskets in some capacity for review of benchmarking. This year, we added in another layer of the claims information, which is the orphan. So we separated again out the orphan and medical claims. The reason why this is important that we have those separated out is because we're going to get the information for those claims for the orphan designated drugs, and then we're going to, or based off of the ICD-10, and then we're going to subtract that from the overall pharmacy claims. So kind of going back to the pharmacy and medical claims, we collect the information at the NDC level, and that includes what the plan spending is, the enrollee cost sharing, and the utilization and enrollee counts. So if you remember in your material packets, those kind of those are our kind of our main sections that we look at. We look at the utilization and the cost, and then kind of what the overall spending was across all the reporting insurers together. So again, the orphan and medical claims will have the same information collected, which is the plan spending, the enrollee sharing, and utilization. However, we have another layer in there that includes like the aggregation of the claims associated with patients under the age 18, and that's for Skyrizi. And then for the Keytruda, the information will be presented in an aggregated form for all claims associated with the ICD-10 codes that Kay went over. So we'll be able to hopefully piece, where those claims costs are going to be separated out between the orphan and standard medical and pharmacy claims. I know I just threw a lot of information over the first two the first 4 bullet points, but before I go on, I want to make sure that that's understandable and don't have any questions to answer. Y'all are shaking your head, so I'm like, okay, I think I'll understand it. So then when we move on to the plan design tab, this is kind of where the collection for like plan type, the formulary status, the copay status, that's where that's all collected, along with like where if there's any step therapy, prior authorization, the provider, physician administered indications. And so this is where we look at like maybe where the price concessions is, where those like access limitations could be. And this is the portion of the material packet that a lot of board members actually really leaned into regarding how to kind of look at where patient access or potential health inequity could come in, because if it had high prior authorization, it means that there's more restrictions. So this is the tab where we collect that information. Regarding the pricing information, again, the pricing just comes from the pharmacy and medical. And then this year, so the pharmacy and medical pricing is just based off of the claims count with the price concessions applied. So for the manufacturers and PBMs and other concessions, that is where we collect where the drug pricing information is, and then that's where the comparison against kind of that gross pricing comes in from the APAC information. So I just covered 2 of the tabs. Is there any questions regarding either plan design or how the pharmacy and medical drug pricing collections happen? All right, hearing none. The last little bit of the therapeutic alternatives. So this year, this is going to be new for us to analyze because last year we did not have the therapeutic alternatives to the subset drugs because we just didn't have time to get it into the data call information. This time we worked a little bit more due diligently prior to the selection of the subset drugs, had the therapeutic alternative drugs ready. So once you selected the drugs, we were able to incorporate them in. Took a lot of prep work, but I think it's going to be much more beneficial for the review, including what the therapeutic alternative net prices are going to be. So again, we have 2 tabs collecting specifically the therapeutic alternative drug pricing. So we're going to collect the that price, claims price concession, any discounts or rebates provided to those therapeutic alternatives. We're seeing a little more clearly what the price is going to be between the gross price that we pull out of APAC and that net price provided from the carriers. So that's going to be a really important gap that we have shored up for this review compared to the change from last year, or from the last one. So any questions from the board member about the collection process that we're collecting from the carriers on the either the claims, plan design information, or drug pricing? And if I'm not hearing anything, we'll go on to the next topic, which I'm sure some of us are excited to talk about, the rubric. One of the things I appreciate about working with the board is prior to these board meetings, we have quick touch bases just to ensure that the material is being reviewed. And the feedback regarding the rubric information has been very helpful. And I'm really glad that this time we have the rubric pretty much set up. And we have the opportunity to talk about how this can be utilized, again, as a tool. It's not a for sure methodology that has to be a structured part of the process. This is for your use as you determine kind of where the parameters are. But because there were so many changes and kind of nuances that happened during the time of its development in the last review, I really wanted to sit for a few minutes and just ask the board or clarify how it's structured, and then make sure that we're capturing everything and relevant so that when we start the review cycle, we're not adding or changing the rubric in midstream. So Pay, if you can scroll to the sections. So again, the rubric was divided into kind of 2 sections, and I'm going to share the screen of the rubric in just a minute so you don't have to recall all the information, but just as a high level, there were 5 sections, 6 sections that 5 sections, sorry, that had the scoring, that had the scoring between 0 and 3, so 0 being the low impact, 3 being the severe impact. And that included utilization, price evaluation, price concessions, and the system and payer spending, and the enrollee burden. And within those, certain number ranges were applied. The ranges in the scoring rubric comes from the data itself. So what we do is once we get all of our claims information, we run a, what is that word? It's like a conditional formatting structure. So we see where each of the scoring components fall in a certain range within the cells. And that creates the range mechanism. And then so we divide that out into the four sections and then apply those numbers into each of the cells. So we're always working from the numbers within the data. This isn't pull out of the clouds numbers that we just come up with, this is based off of that year's information. So I'll clarify that a little bit more when I show you the document. But then on the domain side, and this is the biggest change from the conversation that we had from the last review. So originally the scoring rubric was set up all with scoring. As conversations progressed, a handful of the mechanisms switched to yes, no. And so again, looking at the equity, access, therapeutic alternatives, stakeholder input, dates, and then if the drug was on the CMS negotiation list, those all became yes, no's. And so then we applied the scoring off of that. And then when the scoring rubric was set up, it did find to be relevant to the drugs that were actually selected for the review. So I'm going to share screen. I'm going to spill your screen, A. Just so we can start to see what the initial scoring process was. So again, looking at the domains, we're looking at utilizations, price evaluation, price concessions, system, payer spend, and enrollee burden. All of these numbers, again, will be changed in some capacity based off of what we find from the overall data coming in. However, if there's anything here that the board finds needs to be updated or changed to be more relevant to this review, we have a little bit of time to kind of talk about, and please always reach out to staff if you're I'm sure you're always thinking about PDAB stuff, when you're not in PDAB. So if by any epiphany comes like, well, that would be a better range, please let us know. But just to set up, this is how the scoring rubric would look. So with that one. So before moving over to the yes, no, I want to make sure I'm answering any questions for the board. Do you have any? No? Awesome, thank you. So then moving on to the rubric scoring itself, this is where that yes, no comes in. And within the yes, no, questions were applied. So, was the equity impact, does it show that the drug disproportionately burden or limited access? I am hoping to have a better method for this section. It is kind of a work in progress, but hopefully this will be much easier or much more meaningful in this year's packet regarding more maybe data structure associated with Oregon itself, because in the past we've kind of done the narrative or the clinical research that shows what's going on maybe nationwide or generally within populations, but not really Oregon specific. So that's one of the things that I'm working to improve. Again, drug access restrictions. So, what the high level of prior authorization, step therapy contributed to the system as a burden. And then are there less expensive therapeutic alternatives? And I think this is going to be a really important one. Again, regarding knowing what that gross versus net price is going to be for the therapeutic alternatives. And this may be one of the elements that domains the board may want to consider rolling over to the rubric scoring system. So we need to see what that information is going to be coming back. If there needs to be a scoring system based off of what we're finding, I'll bring this up and we'll have another conversation about it before changing the rubric. But I'm just letting you know that that might be one of the components that might change because we have more accurate information for those therapeutic alternatives. Yeah, Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
And Courtney, thank you for mentioning that, because related to row 5, I mean, that gets us a little bit to a broader discussion of plan design, right? So we may find that a lot of these drugs were priced at a certain point, but other drugs in the therapeutic class were more, which is kind of what we saw in the dashboard when we were looking last time. So I appreciate the inclusion of this piece because I think it's a really important part of the dialogue.
Yeah, thanks. And this is, again, why I'm flagging it, that this might be one of those domains that rolls over to that actual scoring metric component, because I don't think it's going to really capture the yes, no meaningfully once we start seeing those numbers.
Yeah, I would personally be in support of that.
I will update the board as soon as I know what that would look like. And then again, looking at the stakeholder input, again, this was kind of one of the weaker components of last year's review. I'm still okay with it being yes, no, but my hope is that with the forms out right now, getting that identification back, especially from prescribers or individuals with that scientific background who engage with patients and kind of see how the system works from the patient side, from the industry side, and how their prescription or prescribing structure goes. I'm pretty sure it's going to stay the yes, no, depending on maybe what we get back. But this was also one that, because we're hopefully going to get more information, that it's going to provide way more meaningfulness than what it did in the last review. The last two components are basically the exclusivity expiration date, being more than 18 months out. And then if the drug was excluded, so means that the drug is not on that maximum fair price. The board really leaned into during that main decision making that if the drug was on the MFP, it really didn't show to be of as interest to say it had affordability challenges, due to that the federal government was already looking at it in some capacity. So the drugs that were selected were not on that MFP list. And I just want to show you, and I do apologize, it is a little on the tiny side. I'm going to try to blow it up here. But this is the outline from last year's review. Again, the yes, no's, and the moderation, and how the drugs kind of were selected. So when you're looking at VRAYLAR, again, it had a high capacity based off of the numbers of the scoring metric, and then the yes, no's. And because it was excluded from the MFP list, it was chosen over maybe Yogravri, which also had a high number. And that was part of the conversation during the drug selection on the vote time. So if we're looking at, again, Trilogy, or this grouping from last review, Cosentyx was a high scoring based off of the information. And then, and this is one of those things where these are the drugs. So we have Mounjaro, Ozempic, and Jardiance on the list again for this year's review. So it's going to be interesting to see if any of these, sorry about that, my screen just froze out. To see how these are going to change from last year's review to this year's review based off of the price differencing, or maybe even better access or worse access. So that I will take it back to the board for any questions. Yes, Chair Braley.
Courtney, one thing I was thinking of as you were presenting is, I know we've always used 18 months as, does the drug have, is it going to go off patent within 18 months? But I've kind of been thinking about the rolling cycle of the years under review. And while I don't recollect exactly the why we chose 18 months, would something like 12 months be almost more helpful? Because our data, I mean, I guess our data ultimately is always about 18, depending on when we ask for it and things, but would something like 12 months give us flexibility to better integrate market forces into our analysis? Does 18 months, that delta and months, push us, impact potential decision making a little less real time than 12 months might? I know that's more a discussion for the board. That wasn't really a comment to you, Courtney, unless you recall exactly why we chose 18 months as opposed to 12.
I'm searching through notes, and I am not recalling why 18 months was selected.
Yeah, it was just something, I mean, and I don't even know if we have to talk about that today, but I was just kind of thinking with market forces, would 12 months be enough of a runway to still help us make informed decisions, but also exclude some of the things that other market forces are already correcting for. So
I think
I don't know if
what-
anyone feels really strongly one way or the other on that, but I was just kind of thinking about that after I saw it visually. But Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, your hand is raised, so you have the floor.
I mean, I kind of I have a dim recollection of having a discussion around this time frame, but I don't remember the rationale specifically. But more generally, I wonder, I know seems like there's a strong, desire to have these kind of operationalize or codify some of these decisions in terms of like impact, yes, no, put them into buckets. And I mean, personally, as I review these things, I look at more in a qualitative sense. And so in terms of, proportion of plans that put it on a prior authorization or number of patients impacted or things like that. And so I don't get hung up on kind of the categorization so much. But I'm wondering, for this 18 months and also for this, the MFP Medicare thing, I have opinions about that. Even if we just in the material packet, if we have some sense of like, when are patents expiring on this drug? Is it in the next 18 months, or like how many months out? When do we think it's going to be? Because then, if something's going off patent in 12 months or 24 months that we think, I think that just is qualitatively would be something that we could consider rather than saying yes or no, it's within the 18-month window.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate that feedback, Dan. That is something I can look into as far as maybe clarifying and see where that 18 months came from. It was almost 4 years ago. And starting June, it was like the first, June of 2022. And I think we had the conversation maybe in August or September of 2022. So I'll have to go back to the notes to see what that conversation was around. All right, board. Well, this is basically the end of our staff show. Please let us know. Oh, yes, Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, I just wanted to state too that just because a drug is coming off patent doesn't mean that it's available, because we have instances, I think Humira is available generically or biosimilarly in 2029, even though it's off patent. That has been pushed back to 2029. So just because something is coming off patent doesn't automatically mean that it's got therapeutic alternatives, biosimilars, or generics on the market.
Thank you for that reminder, Mr. Kennedy. So I think this leads us to a good time for us to take our 5-minute break. I know it's a little later than we recognized on the agenda, but we will go ahead and take our 5-minute break now, and we will re-adjourn at 10:30 a.m. Pacific. All right, Melissa, could you just do a quick roll check so we can make sure we have quorum to continue?
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Present.
Vice Chair Dan Hartung.
Present.
Lori Hoagland.
Present.
Dan Kennedy.
Present.
Michelle Coder.
Present.
Chris Lehman.
Present.
John Murray.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Melissa. So I would now like to announce that we have a presentation on ArrayRx and Oregon Medicaid here by Trevor Douglas and Dee Weston from the Oregon Health Authority. So to Trevor Douglas and Dee Weston, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, folks. Just take me a brief moment to get my slides sharing here. This hopefully cooperates. There we go. Thank you very much for this opportunity Chair Bailey and members of the PDAB. And for the record, my name is Trevor Douglas. As mentioned, I'm the Director of Pharmacy Policy and Programs at the Oregon Health Authority. And we are housed within the Division of Health Policy and Analytics in the Office of Delivery System Innovation. And my mighty and small team is comprised of 4 members. We have Andrew Gibler, who is our clinical pharmacy manager, Heidi Murphy, who is our operations manager for Oregon Prescription Drug Program and ArrayRx. We have Michael Yu, who's the community pharmacy liaison. And of course, we have Dee Weston, who you'll hear from today, who is our senior pharmacy policy advisor for all things Medicaid. I'd also like to just mention that we do contract with the Oregon State University College of Pharmacy's Drug Use Research and Management team, which is led by our colleague Roger Citron. We also have direct oversight over all of the contract administrative duties over all contracts and interstate agreements associated with ArrayRx. So what I hope to do today is leave you with a better understanding and an explanation of all of these things that I have on the screen today. I want to make sure that people walk away with a clear understanding of the difference between OPDP and ArrayRx. I want to share a little bit of information about what we've been able to do recently. I would have loved to have 2025 numbers, but we're cranking out the data right now for last year. And hope to have that in just a couple of weeks. But I'll be sharing some older data that is still indicative of what we experienced last year. So I'll give you an idea of what we've been able to do. I'd also like to talk a little bit about what other people have said about ArrayRx, and then talk a little bit about the recommendations that have already been made by this board and other programs in DCBS and what that looks like. I'll finish with a little bit of an explanation about critical access pharmacy program and kind of where that's at before I hand it off to Dee to talk a lot about Medicaid. So this is a question that we often get that just really isn't often well understood by many folks. So I tried to make this extremely clear, but if it's not clear, please email me and let me know how I can improve it. OPDP exists under statute as a legal entity. And that entity, that program, the Oregon Prescription Drug Program, is charged statutorily with a number of things, but primarily they have to be able to serve the pharmacy benefit management needs of HEB, OEB, PERS, and all of these things that are mentioned here on the slide. As well as they're charged with cooperating with other states and regional consortia. And we also have to maintain statewide access, and that's why we have a critical access pharmacy program. What's really interesting is the statute does not obligate any of these entities to utilize us as the provider of their PBM services, if you will, or their pharmacy services, depending on what they are needing. And the other thing that is also very interesting about the statute is it offers a vehicle for private entities to participate within Oregon Prescription Drug Program, benefiting from all of the statewide purchasing that OPDP is capable of doing. So hopefully that provides you with an understanding of what OPDP is. One of the things that we get confused for is, or being not really confused for, but synonymous with, is ArrayRx, and that's just not the case. ArrayRx is a separate entity that is not a legal entity, but rather the name given to a multi-state cooperative procurement group that has largely been, for the last 20 years, predating 2022, been just two states, Oregon and Washington. And some of you may have known the prior name of the multi-state cooperative. In that case, it was just two states, and that was called the Northwest Prescription Drug Consortium. But in 2019, we went out for a public procurement as a joint venture, i.e. cooperative procurement, with Washington. And also during that procurement, which was an open, competitive public procurement and operated and exercised under Oregon procurement law, opened the door for other states to join into this multi-state cooperative that we call ArrayRx, that would offer all of the services that ArrayRx and that the Northwest Consortium worked so hard to develop over about a 20-year period, or a 15-year period, pardon me. Each member state and participating entity that is eligible does so under the relevant statutory authority in their relevant jurisdiction. So some states have specific rules about intergovernmental agreements, and they have to abide by those, and we work with those states as directed to by statute to do that. So, whoop, goodness sakes, my apologies. So really quickly, the next slide provides a nice infographic to describe where we came from, and also attempts to describe how we ended up where we are today. So over 20 years ago now, we in Oregon had the establishment of the Oregon Prescription Drug Program, and it was largely to support seniors and uninsured folks prior to Part D, and with the reality that drug prices were rising to the point where people were making very hard decisions between filling medications and paying rent, or buying food, or even split dosing their medications to extend their budgets. Not much has changed. I think the same thing has manifested itself ever since then, and continues to be, there continues to be an affordability problem, which probably explains why we have a prescription drug affordability board. But during the period of time you see represented in the middle of this infographic, the states of Oregon and Washington really spoke to each state's purchasers of medications, and tried to develop programs to effectively leverage the purchasing across both states. And you can see we reached into the various parts of the state's infrastructure to learn how we could create services and solutions to meet the needs of these specific state agencies, like workers' compensation, for example, Medicaid, and voucher programs for state hospital and corrections. Similarly, we also had some state agencies in Washington that were able to pay claims but not able to collect rebate, and so there was some services created, ASO rebate services, to support those entities. That led us to the procurement that I mentioned in 2019 that led to the formation of a new master contract that ended up opening the door for any other state to join. And in 2022, and it seems like every year after we've had a state join, after Nevada, we welcomed Connecticut, then Ohio, and now Arizona. And we're presently talking to more than a handful of other states and jurisdictions in our country about expanding and welcoming ArrayRx into their respective jurisdictions. I think most folks know now, based upon what I just shared, that OPDP and ArrayRx is more than just a discount card program. We have clear, distinct programs that support a wide array of needs in the public sector. And I think it's important to just recognize that we support a number of groups in Washington and Oregon that are in the public sector as well as the private sector in the group pharmacy benefits management arena, as well as workers' comp and Medicaid, Medicare. And in Oregon, we do have a managed Medicare or a CCO utilizing our services. And we also have a contract with Washington Medicaid to support their Medicaid program clinically. The voucher program is largely a program, just so that everyone is aware, that supports the Department of Corrections in Washington and a couple of other jurisdictions in Washington that are counties to assist people that otherwise would have had to pay reasonable, unusual, and customary charges at a pharmacy and to secure the state negotiated rate that we're able to provide for those state agencies, saving and extending taxpayers' revenue to support those folks served by corrections and the state hospitals. We also have noticed that because of the voucher program use in the state hospital and also in discharge from state correctional facilities, historically medication was sent out the door with these folks. Oftentimes facilities reported that there was a lot of waste, meaning they collected bags of unused medications in garbage receptacles on the way out of their facilities. We have found that once we deployed the voucher program, folks were able to actually engage at their community pharmacy, establish a meaningful relationship with their pharmacy in the community that they land at, and were able to then have a first fill that was successfully utilized, and then subsequent refills were made. So an interesting study about the overall timeliness and success of that type of a program. One of the other things that I think is important to just mention is, because we get asked it often, is how we're different from other PBMs. I think there's four things that I want to hit on here, and they're covered in the narrative on the slide. However, I'm not going to read the slide to you. I think there's four primary principles that we adhere to as our core principles, and that is we have public sector oversight, and we administer our contract and innovate with the help of an experienced team of professionals who have responsibility in their own jurisdictions and respective states. All of us have and share in an aligned fiduciary responsibility, which is unlike any other PBM that exists in the marketplace. And I'll cover who these folks are that contribute to the oversight in just a moment on the next slide. We also require, as a core principle, genuine pass-through reimbursement and revenues. We don't permit spread pricing. We also require 100% of all manufacturer-derived revenues that are attributable to any of our members' pharmacy claims to be passed through. There's no withholding of any of that revenue by our contractors or subcontractors. It all has to be passed through. We have auditability and accountability requirements within our contract. We audit to verify that our agreement terms are adhered to, and we also conduct an annual third-party market assessment to ensure that we remain competitive within the marketplace and have specific language in our contract that allows us to reopen negotiations around pricing should that be necessary based upon the outcome of that third-party assessment. And then finally, we all appreciate predictability and we all appreciate partnership, and the entire goal of ArrayRx is to bring about upfront pricing and full awareness of the costs with a no surprise approach to how pharmacy benefit administration or pharmacy benefit management services are delivered to the respective public sector members. And we work together as a steering committee and enjoy a rich partnership to really share best practices and innovate together. And I'm pleased to be part of a growing group of professionals that bring well over 200 years of aggregated experience in the pharmacy space, whether that's working in a facility that is run by a state or even in their prior lives worked in a facility that was not run by a state, and those that also have dedicated years of their lives to public service in respective Medicaid agencies and their public employee benefit groups. I think it goes without saying, you can read for yourselves, that these folks possess knowledge and experience that really are what is important to an informed and grounded leadership group. And this group is only enhanced by our routine consultation with the Oregon Department of Justice and the Washington Office of the Attorney General in the review of all of our contracts that we have for PBM services and also our intergovernmental agreements across the country. So I'm going to transition now and talk a little bit about the data and a little bit about where we are today. My apologies for not having more up-to-date numbers just by virtue of timing of this presentation and when data arrived into our warehouses, there's just not enough lead time to complete it. But I will provide updates where I can, and they'll be verbal, not actual written down on the slide here. But you can see over the life of the program, both in the global ArrayRx family, we have seen and appreciated some considerable growth over the last 5 years, particularly. And the same can be said about Oregon's steady growth over the years. There continues to be interest. There continues to be an exploration of what OPDP can bring when leveraging the greater consortium ArrayRx. Today, we have surpassed, as of actually last month's data, we've passed 890,000 lives. And so that's across ArrayRx total. And so you can see that we are growing quite rapidly even this year. What does that mean for Oregon? OPDP obviously leverages our membership in ArrayRx to serve well over 300,000 lives now. And during the 2022-2024 time period, via pass-through pricing and pass-through rebates, we've eclipsed well over $120 million in savings that are attributable to our efforts utilizing ArrayRx under OPDP, serving those folks that actually utilize us. Across the greater country, we have been able to deliver well over $800 million in savings, 35 million of which is attributed to eliminating spread pricing, and the other balance falling into our rebate pass-through provisions. Quickly, this slide is, I think, an important one because often people won't take my word for what it is that I do. And so it's always helpful to have neutral third parties weigh in, and oftentimes there's conversations with folks that we have as an ArrayRx steering committee that pose some pretty pointed questions and really dive deeply in analyzing what we do. And that's really been the case of at least two of these statements. One was completely unsolicited, and that was from Aaron Fuse-Brown from Brown University, who recently on a Policy Wonk health policy podcast with KFF cast a very favorable light on ArrayRx as seen here on screen. And then separately, we have been interviewed extensively and studied by the New York University School of Law and a group of professors and students that are in their latter years of training to be lawyers. Have put together a white paper that you'd be able, I'm happy to share with you all. But they noted that ArrayRx it was a viable public PBM option. And then finally, we have a third party entity that is separately paid to do an assessment of our contract, and they also found that the terms of our contract placed the client needs and goals first and foremost above everything else. I won't take too much time on this section because these are your recommendations for the past several years. And we appreciate being called out and named as a viable solution potential to, or at least an entity that should be considered as it relates to expansion, namely because of what I mentioned earlier, that we're obligated statutorily to be able to provide all of these services, but yet none of those entities are required or mandated to even consider utilizing OPDP. And then also appreciate the recommendations to have a centralized multi-agency purchasing entity that coordinates procurement across all state-funded pharmacy programs to really, truly effectively leverage Oregon's purchasing power. I think there is a lot to be said for that, and ties nicely into the work that we do with OPDP and the work that you're doing around affordability. I think oftentimes bulk purchasing is a term that is cast around and not well understood, and I think it's important to just designate that there are two different types of purchasing that take place in the public sector. And I've tried to provide clear examples of both of those. There's buying of a drug and actually taking possession of it for use in a program or a facility. So you have organizations or state agencies rather inside of our state, like the Department of Corrections, like the state hospital, where they have folks that they are serving inside of their facilities and actually taking possession of a medication that the state has paid for. Opposite of that, or aligned but different from other state agencies that actually make payment for a drug so that a recipient receives a prescription, are the other types of bulk purchasing that occur. And I think it's self-explanatory who those folks are based upon the examples I provide there. I think more importantly, aligning with the recommendations that you've had previously, and just want to point out that bulk purchasing is still fragmented and remains fragmented across agencies without a clear centralized analytics or area that can effectively leverage the expertise of those that actually understand what Medicaid is doing and why, and what potentially PDAB and OAB could be doing with respect to joining together with others like PERS and how that's different from the Oregon Department of Corrections and the Oregon State Hospital type of purchasing. So just, I think that this question is asked more to inspire more conversation and dialogue with everybody as it relates to how Oregon can more effectively leverage their purchasing power in the marketplace. And finally, I've used this slide in multiple places, but I think it's important, and I think it demonstrates our commitment at OPDP and at the Oregon Health Authority to ensure that we are monitoring our pharmacy network, if you will, and the consequences of pharmacy closures. And even prior to 2024, when Oregon was recognized by the Associated Press as having the second worst level of pharmacy access in the nation, we were working to amend our rules in OPDP to re-look at how a CAP designation is assigned. And we moved away from this strictly geographic boundary definition, 10-mile radius, to now consider 3 different types of pharmacy settings: frontier, rural, and even urban settings, and tie U.S. Census high poverty census tracts to consideration of whether a pharmacy should be considered a CAP or not. And we've also added considerations for tribal pharmacies and FQHCs, as well as really focusing on pharmacies that have Oregon ownership. Since our work on this, we've expanded from 21 pharmacies designated a CAP to 86 pharmacies as of this month. Finally, I wanted to not spend a whole lot of time. I think clearly you can see that ArrayRx really is trying to bring the power of multiple states to effectively learn from others and their best practices, and also share ours to mutually benefit everyone's collective purchasing power. And it's been important to, I think it's important to note that OPDP's leadership has been instrumental in this development and expansion over the last, particularly over the last 5 years. And we're always looking for ways to enhance pharmacy access and support pharmacy access and affordability, as are you. And with that, I am going to quickly hand off to Dee Weston.
Trevor, before you leave, I noticed a couple board members had hands up.
I'm not leaving. I was just going to say, Chair Bailey, if it's okay, hold questions until the end so that we can address and have time to get through everything.
That works.
Sorry about that. I am here and I'm now off mute. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Trevor. And I need to share my screen, so hopefully I can do that without difficulty. One moment, please. All right. Okay, does that work?
Yep.
Okay, great. I am Dee Weston, Deborah Weston, but I go by Dee, she, her pronouns. I'm pharmacy program policy advisor with the state. And I was on jury duty this week and did not think I was going to be here presenting to you all. So I did my best to put together a hodgepodge of different slides. I think this will be a good use of time. Hopefully everybody is going to learn at least something. And then feel good about yourselves for the things that you already knew that I will be covering. But I thought, what more fun than to start with a pop quiz? This is maybe an easy one, maybe a hard one. It's kind of a tricky one, so I'm not going to ask anyone to raise their hand to out themselves. But the pop quiz is, if a state chooses to participate in Medicaid, and we know all states do, if a state chooses to participate in Medicaid, they must cover drugs. True or false? And this is a fun one because it's something that my colleagues like to torment me with. They like to threaten me with, hey, it's an optional benefit. And Trevor's shaking his head because he knows he's done that to me. No, states are actually not required to cover drugs if they participate in Medicaid. However, all states do, and Puerto Rico as well. And they do that because, first of all, medications are absolutely critical to overall healthcare, to disease management, prevention, quality of life, those kinds of things. And they are really expensive. Medications are very expensive, and it's just unaffordable without federal help. And that federal help comes in two major forms. One is federal match. The federal government picks up the tab for at least 50% of the cost. In Oregon, it's a bit higher than that. And there's a federal Medicaid drug rebate that comes to states who participate. You only get those two things if you cover medications in your drugs, in your Medicaid program. Of course, with those benefits, there are strings that are attached. Some of those strings are things that you have to do, and then there are things that you can choose to do, and then there are things that you must not do with the federal funds. Among the things that we are required to do is to have programming that ensures safety and efficacy and appropriateness of the drugs that we cover. That's primarily done through something called prospective DUR or ProDUR, that's before dispensing, certain screens and checks that happen before the drug is dispensed. There's retrospective, after dispensing, things that happen. Educational and outreach programs are also required for states who participate. And then the big one that we spend a lot of time talking about is states must provide what we call, you won't find this written down in the law, anything so clearly, but basically states have to have a pathway to coverage of medically accepted indications for all rebatable drugs. I'm going to try to break down each of those a little bit. And there are some exceptions as well, I'll briefly touch on. And then in addition, something that's specific to just fee-for-service is the fee-for-service programs must reimburse pharmacies using an acquisition or cost-based approach. And that is something I'm going to touch on in a later slide. But so first, let's kind of unpack that overarching, you'll probably hear us say a pathway to coverage. And this is what we're talking about. The pathway to coverage is, we could still require prior authorization, but we can't have what some might call a closed formulary. We can't totally say, no, we don't think that drug works or is appropriate, so we're not going to cover it at all. Those are things that we can't do if it's rebatable. Medically accepted indications, that's starting point is the FDA labeling. There's some gray area about, can we be more restrictive than labeling? And maybe, yes. But we also have to cover access when the drug is the use is supported by certain official compendia. And then finally, rebatable drugs. Well, what's a rebatable drug? I'd say just about everything. Just about everything's a rebatable drug. And there are reasons for that. I'll get to in just a moment. So basically, you're kind of left with states have not a lot of flexibility. If they choose to participate in the Medicaid program and cover drugs, which they kind of have to do financially, you got to cover medications kind of along FDA labeling. And you have to have at least a pathway to coverage, but you're going to require prior authorization. Okay. Exceptions. There's a short list of drugs that states can just choose. They don't have to cover, even if they might be rebatable. It's up to the state. And there are things that we're not allowed to cover with federal funds. So I'll go on to the next slide. Things that we are allowed to cover, but not required to cover. You can see them listed here. I'm just, in the interest of time, just going to touch on some of the hot button things. We do cover over-the-counter drugs when our Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee recommends it. We don't cover drugs for weight loss. That is big in the news, and that's something that Oregon and still most states do not cover drugs when used for weight loss. And if we wanted to add coverage, we would need to amend our state plan to add that coverage, the optional coverage. Those are the optionals. Now, for the things that we are not allowed to use Medicaid federal funds to cover, you can see the list here, and I'm happy to get the slides out. But two things that come up fairly regular that can come up for Oregon in particular are abortion. There is very limited role where you can use federal funds for abortion, but in Oregon, to get out of the role of deciding whether or not it meets the federally allowed coverage of abortion, Oregon just covers it with state funds. Just sidestep it. We use state funds, state-only funds to pay for it. And also death with dignity. That's also something that is not, we don't get federal match for that, but that's something that's important to the people of Oregon and something we've chosen repeatedly that we want to afford. So those are the excluded drugs. And I told you I was going to get back to rebate. In truth, rebate would be its own presentation. It could easily take, I don't know, however much time you want. I will fill it with important information about rebates. I just want to hit on some of the main points. Manufacturer participates in the federal drug Medicaid rebate program. It's an agreement between that manufacturer and the federal government, and what it buys that manufacturer is access to Medicaid. That's why they do it, because if they participate, then states have to have a pathway to coverage for their drug. Another important aspect is that in each state, there's a single appointed state agency that is responsible for invoicing drug manufacturers for all the drugs that were covered with Medicaid funds. So that means in Oregon, that's Oregon Health Authority, OHA. It's responsible for invoicing all manufacturers for all the drugs that were covered by CCOs, that were covered by fee-for-service, that were administered in a clinic setting, that weren't even billed by a pharmacy, but a practitioner-administered drug. All of those are invoiced by OHA. Also important, super secret confidential information that we cannot disclose outside of a need-to-know basis. And that does include that CCOs don't know how much these rebates the OHA is collecting. They don't realize that that brand drug that fee-for-service for some reason is preferring is actually way cheaper than the generic because of rebate. I guess the nice thing about drug rebate is it really protects Medicaid programs in a number of different ways. Not only does it just give you a big discount, and these are substantial discounts, but it also ensures that states get the best price. Like there is not a better deal in town outside of maybe federal purchasing or the 340B or Medicaid programs itself, but we get the best deal. And we are protected from egregious price increases. So when you hear in the news that drug manufacturer X increased by 3,000% their cost of their drug, that's terrible. The good news is that Medicaid is protected from that. All these rebates are shared back with the federal government. The state doesn't just keep them all. We share back basically in proportion to what percentage the federal government paid for the drug in the first place. So those are the kind of highlights of Medicaid drug rebate. And that's for the federally mandated, the things that their manufacturers are participating in. In addition to the federally mandated rebates, we also have supplemental drug rebates. So it's in addition to those things I just talked about. What I just talked about buys access to Medicaid. What supplemental rebates do is they kind of buy access to the preferred drug list. And I'm speaking here of like fee-for-service program. These are agreements, well, they're all agreements between the state and the manufacturer. Again, it's usually contingent on preferring their product over their competitors. It doesn't typically include CCO utilization, but they can if the manufacturer agrees to it. But in both cases, for all these rebates, 340B is excluded. We don't get to collect rebate on 340B drugs, and we share the results with the federal government. And you can see the drug count. So again, just about all drugs are part of the federally mandated, and then a very much smaller list for the supplemental. Okay, so CCO versus fee-for-service. How are they different? How are they the same? A lot of what I've talked about so far is the same. You have to have a pathway to coverage. for all rebatable drugs, et cetera. Where things get kind of funky, and I'm sure probably all of you know about this, is that CCOs are allowed to have their own preferred drug lists, and they can develop their independent prior authorization criteria. But for the prior authorization criteria, they can't be more restrictive than fee-for-service. But I know that the question about different preferred drug lists is a big one. And the reason why things can be so different is largely because each side, fee-for-service and CCOs, are kind of operating under the information that we have and what is in the best interest of our members and our financials. As I said, CCOs don't know what the drug rebate is. They're making their own deals through their pharmacy benefit manager, and their cost, what's the best deal for them may be different than what's the best deal for fee-for-service, and that can result in pretty big differences. Also, very different is reimbursement methodology. As I said at the beginning, fee-for-service programs are required to use a cost-based approach. That is something that actually Oregon, in one other state, we really pioneered. Maybe that's not the best word, but we were the first to use this method. And now it is required by all state Medicaid programs, their fee-for-service programs. It is not required for managed care entities. So CCOs in Oregon, they tend to reimburse pharmacies more like a commercial approach. It's not based on the cost. It's generally based on average wholesale price, or what Trevor and others lovingly call ain't what's paid, because it's kind of a made up number, minus a percentage, and then a very, very small dispense fee. These two approaches are very different. It's difficult. You can't, maybe arguably it would be inappropriate maybe to pick just one piece of that, the dispense fee, and then still keep the reimbursement method. Yeah, that also is a whole separate presentation I'd be happy to talk about. Okay, so those are some of the differences, the things that are same, things that are different. I did want to touch on carve-outs because all those differences have a lot of downsides for different ways. One downside is there could be differences in coverage, and that can be impactful to members who need to use those medications. So this is an issue that came out at the very beginning. I still have everybody? Oh, sorry, things popping up. I hope somebody lets Hasina in. The mental health carve out, something that was identified very early on when we first had a preferred drug list, that there was concern that, okay, you're going to have all these different managed care entities, CCOs now, that will have different preferred drug lists, and that's going to be a problem for members who may switch between programs. There needs to be more uniformity. So we do carve out mental health drugs. You can see the definition here. Basically, we will reevaluate what is included in the mental health drug carve out based on latest treatments and other information. You can see how they're identified here. Also unique is that we cannot operate a preferred drug list to promote the lowest cost option. That is something that we will be revisiting, I believe, in a future legislative session. That also can get into some technicality. In theory, we have the ability to have an enforceable preferred drug list for mental health drugs, but we can't actually accomplish it because of the conditions under which it would have to operate. But that's the mental health carve out. Those are carved out when a pharmacy bills for the medication. The latest carve out we expanded is the high cost drug carve out. That started this year for an entirely different reason. This started as the tables that we have had with CCOs to try to ensure their long-term viability. And we had lots of different ideas presented. This was the one that rose to the top for the pharmacy table. And it wasn't so much saving CCOs money as it was to protect them from uncertainty. So the high cost drug carve out focuses on things that have a greater likelihood of possibly being really devastating to a CCO, especially a small CCO. So it targets drugs that have an acquisition cost of excuse me, $500,000 or more. That could be for a single treatment or over the course of the year. They are drugs that are indicated to treat rare conditions and drugs that have few alternatives. Those are the things that have the possibility of being added to the high-cost drug carve-out, and then when approved, they are incorporated and they are covered by fee-for-service. CCOs, importantly, are still responsible for everything else, for care coordination and all other costs. And I'm blazing ahead. A separate slide deck had a lot of information about pharmacy reimbursement for fee-for-service. I tried to like pare it down, and the formatting doesn't look great, but hopefully you'll get the general idea. This is what's unique. One of the things that's unique about pharmacy reimbursement, fee-for-service versus CCO is reimbursement. States are required to use an acquisition or a cost-based approach for reimbursing pharmacies. And there are two components to that. There's the cost of we call it the ingredient cost often, cost of the drug itself, and then the cost of dispensing, like what it costs to operate a pharmacy and to dispense a drug. In both of those components, Oregon uses a survey-based approach to try to figure out how much stuff costs. There's a survey-based estimate of acquisition costs that's conducted periodically to get the cost of the drug itself. And then every 3 years, we do a cost to dispense survey. And I think we're getting close to time to conduct that again. Historically, every year we've done this for dispense fees. We end up with these different tiers because not all pharmacies are the same. And we establish different tiers for the reimbursement professional dispense fee based largely on volume. Like a very high volume pharmacy tends to have a lower cost of dispensing each of those drugs. So they have a lower dispense fee, and the reverse is true, low volume, higher cost dispense. We also know through surveys that 340B covered entities tend to have a higher cost of operation in dispensing their medications, and so they have their own tier. And then CAP, Designated Critical Access Pharmacies. That's thanks to Trevor's team. Well, I'm part of Trevor's team, but part of the Trevor's team that focuses on ArrayRx and the critical access pharmacies. Fee-for-Service adopts that designation and ensures that to make sure that those pharmacies are at least in the best position of any of the volume-based pharmacies, they get the highest professional dispense fee apart from 340B. That is the basics of reimbursement. I would say also in addition, if you're a regular community retail pharmacy, you must bill your usual and customary. You can't inflate your cost to bill bill Medicaid more, bill fee-for-service more. And you have to give fee-for-service the best discounts that are available. And for 340B covered entities, they are required to pass along their acquisition costs. That is a big deal. And again, yet another whole conversation by itself. But this is federal law, and fee-for-service must be awarded capture that 340B discount, which can be very significant. And that is neither of those things apply to CCOs. They can have their own methodology, and they do have their own methodology, and they tend to reimburse 340B covered entities more at a commercial rate, not the discounted rate. I have some examples here. These probably aren't super helpful. They are part, again, of a larger conversation. But you can see we never are going to voluntarily give a pharmacy more than they bill. We don't just give pharmacies extra money that they don't ask for. So in that first example, you can see that's kind of an example of what a high volume pharmacy might see. They are, in this example, they are billing their usual and customary, which is less than what we would estimate the cost would be. We think the cost is higher. But we don't pay more than they ask for, so we pay them $10. And that second example is is closer to, it's bound by not what they billed us, but by what we think the drug and the active dispensing would cost. And the third example is a low volume pharmacy who has a higher operating cost. And then you have the 340B section. Again, they're required to bill us their acquisition cost plus their professional expense fee. I'm sorry that there's maybe not a super useful example there, but I wanted to make sure I captured it a little bit. And that was all I had. There's my contact information. And I know that there were questions on Trevor's portion. Don't have a lot of time, but I thought I'd turn it back over so you can capture those.
Thank you very much, Dee. We'll go ahead in order of the hands I saw raised for Trevor's section. I also had a question, Dee, so hopefully you can stay for a few minutes.
Oh, yes.
But I think the first hand that I saw raised was Chris Lehman. So Chris, if you still wanted to lean into the question that you had when Trevor was presenting, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair Bailey. And I'll just say thank you to both Trevor and Dee for the presentations today. I learned a lot. You had said, hopefully you'll learn a little bit from both of you guys. I learned a lot, so we appreciate you guys coming to inform us and for all the work that you and your teams do. So thank you so much. Trevor, my question had to do with back to in your presentation, I think it was, I don't remember exactly, but like slide 13 or 14 of your presentation where you were talking about the each of the different organizations in the state and having their own PBMs. Has there ever been an analysis at the state level about what the savings could potentially be if it was sort of required that those state and agencies might not be the right term, Trevor, but like that each of the groups that's like the CCOs who go out and do their own RFPs, I'm sure for PBMs, if we mandated that everyone in the state used the same PBM, how much savings there would be?
So the good question. Thank you, Chris, for the question. I think that how I would answer this question is this: we've seen an illustration of what that meant for the state of Washington, and if you just look at the numbers that I was sharing about the overall aggregated savings eclipsing $800 million. Remember that largely Oregon and Washington represent the vast majority of those lives, right? And Oregon, so let's think of that, 890,000 lives. 300,000 of those are Oregon lives. The remainder are Washington lives. And look at what they've been able to do with the balance of, so we represent 120 million of the savings when you combine the two pass-through principles of banning spread pricing and making sure that you have 100% pass-through of all revenues and rebates paid by the manufacturer's attributed claim. 120 some million are Oregon. The balance are Washington, essentially. So that should tell you or answer your question.
Do we know the number of covered lives then that are, is there a number of covered lives that are part of those other groups that aren't part of ArrayRx in Oregon then?
Oh, yes, in Oregon, for sure. Yes, there are a large number of folks. Only the PEB and OEB plans that are operated by MODA Health Plan actually participate in the Oregon Prescription Drug Program and ArrayRx. The balance of them are either Kaiser lives or Providence lives.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Hoagland, before I give you the floor, I think John had his hand up previously, so I'll make sure to acknowledge Mr. Murray. If you still wanted to lean into any comments you had or questions, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. Yeah, thank you again, Trevor and Dee, for coming today. And Chris kind of started the conversation that I was going to have. You know, I've voiced in the past, you know, having a single PBM represent Medicaid and even CCO services in the state of Oregon. And just this year, you mentioned Washington being able to demonstrate dollars saved by instituting that. And, you know, there's Ohio, and I know the Milliman report discounts that it was true savings in dollars, but the qualitative impacts were substantial from having increased transparency and decreased spread pricing. You know, think one of the chief problems that you mentioned earlier, Trevor, is access to pharmacies. You know, when I can count on one hand the number of pharmacies that serve Eastern Oregon, pretty much out of the 84 corridor, that's not a good thing. And since we have the worst access in this lower 48, the qualitative impacts of having a single PBM for Medicaid and CCO services might be quite valuable. And so I guess, you know, now that we see Minnesota and Nevada and Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, Washington, you mentioned, these are all states that sound like they all either have or are going to have the single Medicaid PBM. I would really, you know, that's why I push on as a PDAB board member, you know, we can find substantive information on drugs that are too expensive or drugs, but how does it affect the patient ability to pay? You know, we see these letters from and input and surveys of how patients can't afford their medications or can't even get to their medications in Eastern Oregon. I'm going to continue to advocate that the PDAB talk about these issues in our forum. And this is just one of them that I want to bring up. As you well know, I speak on this often, whether it's in front of the legislature or it's here in the PDAB. We have to find a better way than what we're doing in Oregon. When we're lagging this far behind in ability to provide services and we have the tools available, we started the tools to help make this more productive and efficient. Why are we not using them? So yeah, you'll hear me harp and continue to ask questions about this. If the legislature needs to give the PDAB more flexibility to talk about these things and shine light on other states that are doing better than Oregon is, we need to be able to do it. So anyway, we'll get off my soapbox, but.
All right, Ms. Hoagland, your hand was raised and you have the floor.
Yeah, I am a healthcare provider, so I'm not as fluent with the pharmacy business, and I'm a little bit confused about the relationship with our ArrayRx and OPDP. I mean, people make decisions like once a year on whether who's handling their respective patients. How does that relationship work?
Lori, thank you for the question, and I'll do my best to try to answer it. What I want to make sure you understand clearly is the Oregon Prescription Drug Program is required by statute to provide a mechanism to secure advantageous pricing for prescription drugs for a number of entities, and they're listed in my slide deck, which you can, and I'm happy to have a side conversation with you about, but they're also listed in statute. So for the lawyers listening, ORS 414.312, for the rest of the normal folks, essentially what that means is that you have an entity, OPDP, that is obligated to make sure you have a viable solution to provide pharmacy benefit management services and or a way to serve these entities, and entities that are listed that are not obligated in any way, shape, or form to actually utilize OPDP. Separately, in the same statute, OPDP is allowed to and encouraged to participate in regional consortia or with other states in the process of leveraging purchasing power to mutually benefit one another. Therein lies the mechanism that we in Oregon leveraged with the state of Washington way back in 2005 to begin to start a multi-state consortium that allows for all of those states to come together to purchase. That led to a steering committee being formed, and we meet weekly. We provide oversight over the contractor that we use. The master administrator contract is awarded to Moda Health presently, and so we provide oversight. The 13 folks that I mentioned provide oversight over the work that they do for ArrayRx, which in turn serves particular folks that utilize or have elected to utilize OPDP. Does that help you understand kind of how it works?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, I think I saw your hand next, so you have the floor.
Yeah, great. Thanks for those presentations. Very informative. I have one question for each of you. On the OPDP side, you've listed that about 300,000 Oregonians get coverage through OPDP in the state. And this kind of aligns with board member Lehman's question about, I think it was related to perhaps other entities that might be able to take advantage of OPDP. And so do we have like what's the ceiling in terms of like if CCO, if CCOs were to sign on to OPDP or our Part D plans or commercial plans, if they were to sign on, what's the ceiling in the number of Oregonians that could benefit from those services?
Dr. Hartung, thank you for the question. Appreciate seeing you as always, and appreciate your question. I think it's important to recognize that I think what you're asking is what are the total number of Oregonians that are potentially able to avail themselves of this if all of those folks that are mentioned in statute are in some way, shape, or form obligated to actually even consider or mandate them that they consider utilizing us. So I would just start by just simply saying, well, if we start with Medicaid, we would move from roughly about 60,000 lives to 1.2, 1.3 million lives. If we carve out the fee-for-service lives, then it might be closer to 1.2. But that's what we're talking about just there. If we're talking about HEB and OEB lives, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of more lives coming on board and effectively being able to be leveraged in addition to that 1.2 million lives that I just mentioned. If we think of PERS and we think of the retirees that we might support through a Part D and through early retiree programs that might also benefit, that would probably be in the tens of thousands of lives being additive to that number. I think you get the picture. If you keep looking at each one of those entities named in the statute, you're going to be able to delineate direct numbers of lives that could benefit from the effective and more powerful leveraging that Washington State and their statute has enabled them to do, and that Oregon has not availed themselves of yet.
And so as it's written, the CCOs could contract with OPDP for their PBM services. That's well within their ability to do so right now.
Yes, and in fact, the CCOs in contract have a provision that if they do utilize us, they're not obligated to do an independent third-party audit of their PBM because we would do that as part of our exercise under OPDP.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah. I'm sure you had a question for Dee, though.
Yeah, I did, and it was about again this distinction between CCO and fee for service and the rebates and stuff, and you mentioned it in terms of CCOs are developing their own formularies and benefit services, and they're kind of, while the rebates are collected for utilization that's occurring in the CCOs, they don't have visibility on those rebates, so they may be recommending drugs that are, they think are less expensive, but in reality, there may be huge savings that they're not seeing that are being collected on the rebate side. And so I'm just wondering, is there any has there been analyses that have been done to look at, if CCOs were operating like they received all the rebate dollars that were coming into the state, other rebate dollars that aren't being captured that maybe should be captured, basically, if CCOs were aligning their benefits to maximize those kind of gathering of those rebates. I know it's like a very wonky question.
I love wonky questions, and I would expect nothing less of you, Dr. Hartung. I know where you're going because there's a misalignment of information and incentives. CCOs are they have capitation that is based on their actual cost. So their actual actuarial soundness requirements apply, and that is not my world at all. We have a whole team of actuaries that are looking at what should the capitation be, and that is based on the CCO's actual cost. So when we collect those rebates, I mean, we use those rebates in part to fund the capitation. If we were to, there's no real way to give them money based on what was their utilization or not, because it's supposed to be on their actual cost. We could, in theory, and many states do this, require a single preferred drug list that applies throughout the entire system, and then adjust capitation rates to meet that potentially higher cost. That's something that could be done. That is something that we did analyze some time ago, and I don't know if Trevor has anything to share about anything we've looked into before, but that there have been analyses done about potential savings from having an aligned or single PDL. I don't know if that answers your question, but it kind of hopefully it gets to it. And they are also making their own rebate agreements and looking to lower their costs. So I don't want to discount that there is some benefit, there's possibly some benefit from them lowering their own costs, which hopefully lowers their capitation, but they don't come close to what we can collect through Medicaid rebate.
I have nothing more to add.
Yeah, thank you.
And Mr. Kennedy, your hand was raised next, so you
Yes.
have the floor.
I would like to follow up with everybody and thank Trevor and Dee for coming here today. I think it's been very, very informative. I was originally one of the architects of the original PDL, and so I'm very familiar with ODPD. It was a long time ago. One of the questions I had, Trevor, for you, I think you answered, and I caught it on the side here, is how often does a steering committee meet?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, Dan. Thank you for the question. The steering committee meets every week without fail. The only exception to that might be if it falls on a statutory holiday, in which case we would not meet. But we routinely meet every week. There also are ad hoc meetings that different parts of the steering committee meet as it relates to specific program areas. So like, for example, as you can imagine, there's Medicaid specific type topics that get discussed that perhaps maybe not the Department of Corrections folks and the state hospital folks really want to mire their time in, nor would they provide helpful input. So that tends to be a focused discussion and conversation and a separate meeting. So that's the type of meetings that happen on a weekly, day in, day out basis.
Okay, and my other is not really so much a question as a comment. And my concern is that if we were to convince everybody in the whole state of Oregon that we should use one specific PDL, one of the problems with the PDLs previously was that it's not enforceable. So providers can skip around it and go take a right turn around it, and there's no teeth in a PDL as opposed to a closed formulary. So my question is, would we have to go to Congress to amend the rule that state Medicaid agencies cannot create prior authorization? Or it sounds like you can create prior authorization as long as there's a road to access. Is that correct?
Dee, this is your bailiwick, so go for it.
Sure. Yeah, we can't have a closed formulary. That's beyond our ability to, they would never be granted. I can't imagine it ever being granted. But so, yes, we can have a prior authorization. We can require prior authorization. We don't have an effective way to promote lower cost mental health drugs. So we don't have an enforceable preferred drug list for mental health drugs that will maybe be changing probably in the future. You may be thinking of what do we call it? The provider prevails kind of language, where many CCOs and commercial plans, they will not only say, hey, well, use this drug, we think it's better, but they will require a justification for why they say that they can't use the one you want. And that used to be something in our state law that fee-for-service wasn't allowed to do. We could do that now, and that's something that we've discussed. So putting a little bit more teeth behind it. There's always a balance between enforcement and not trying not to provide barriers to access or administrative hurdles that don't serve a purpose. So we try to walk that line and build into clinical prior authorization criteria when it's important.
All right, well, I guess this is kind of a comment and a question both to Dee and to Trevor. I mean, anyone who's listened to these meetings over the years has certainly heard my opinions about trying to consolidate purchases and trying to see what we can do to help bend the cost curve. So as we start talking about, to Dr. Hartung's question about number of lives or things like that, I did want to do just a kind of a listen check and a comment. So Dee, when you were presenting on Medicaid rebates and you talked about the Medicaid rebate, the supplemental rebate, and then essentially an MCO PBM rebate, there is a world in the managed Medicaid space, at least, where there's the opportunity, if the drug was the same in all three scenarios of 3 rebates. Is that
well, I'm trying to think about that. It's possible that it's possible that that for a CCO member that their PBM for the CCO has had an agreement with a manufacturer to collect some kind of rebate, and that drug would also necessarily be part of the federal drug rebate because it's mandatory. It's Medicaid funds were used, so we have to collect rebate on it. And then it would be up to, for the fee-for-service supplemental rebate agreement, that would have to be up to the manufacturer for them to decide that, yeah, we will allow you to invoice for CCO utilization. That's less likely to happen, but it is possible because for whatever reason, drug manufacturers will sometimes say it is important enough to us that we get to say that Oregon Medicaid prefers our drug, that we are willing to pay a rebate even if it's covered by the CCO. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for sharing that, just because it kind of just shows that there's a world where that's a potential. So when we think of the number, going back to the number of lives and aggregating and trying to both have a lower out of pocket to the consumer and less expense to the payer, one thing I did want to just kind of have an open discussion about is also, indeed, this leans into your comment about managed Medicaid, because managed Medicaid doesn't have a floor related to dispense fees, right? So you kind of talked about, I think Oregon was actually second after Mississippi to do this. Because I was involved in it 20 years ago and I fought heavily against it, but now I'm happy that it exists. So things change, right?
Yes.
But so personally, I went back because I remember Trevor presented a couple years ago to this board. So I went back and pulled some of the slides related to ArrayRx and where some of the savings was being generated, because something that did pique my interest was the way I read the deck, and the way I still read the deck now that I relooked at the old deck, is related to pharmacy reimbursement. So pharmacy reimbursement is a piece of kind of affordability and access, because if there ain't no pharmacy, you can't have access. So I very much appreciate the growing cap pharmacies. Had I still owned a pharmacy, I would very much like to think we would have been one because of the enhanced services. So, and I would have called Trevor every single day until I was one. But I mean, so I appreciate your flexibility that it's not just mileage, which right now is some of the CMS stuff. But I did kind of start diving into data that I had access to. So I went to a non-cap pharmacy just because I live in Portland, so I didn't really know where any cap pharmacies would be. And instead of filling one of my branded drugs in one of my generics, I have one for my child, one for me, on my traditional benefit, I went and signed up for ArrayRx. now, again, to disclaim, that's only the ArrayRx cash card, not any of the other services available. And when I was talking to the pharmacy and just kind of asking about, looking at what my out-of-pocket was, and then kind of convinced them to share with me a little bit on the reimbursement, pharmacy, the out-of-pocket, and then I compared against GoodRx, so I'm just going to be very transparent here in this discussion. The ArrayRx price was more expensive to the consumer as a cash card than GoodRx and paid the pharmacy less favorably. So I'm just sharing this because I very much am a supporter. I mean, again, we can look at what a lot of other states are doing on managed Medicaid, and I feel very strongly that what we're doing in Medicaid is very broken and is part of why we have this massive pharmacy access problem. And again, just everyone that knows me would know I already feel that way, so I'm just stating it. But I do want to share that with the information available to me on the cash card side, at least, because that's all I could access, I would have if today I was given an opportunity to make decisions, which clearly I can make no decisions, but if I could, I would very much struggle knowing the delta between what I pulled up AAAC rates for the drugs that my family got per unit, and I added the lowest pharmacy dispense fee. And in comparison to the fee for service versus the ArrayRx and the ArrayRx D2C price versus GoodRx, it would be a challenge for me to choose it given and I know ArrayRx isn't the PBM, so that's another part of this that I acknowledge, but I want to make sure that is part of the discussion because I could very much personally get behind some of these discussions and been at the forefront of them, but the rates to pharmacies would very much be a problem. So I know that was long-winded, and I know it wasn't even maybe a question, but I did want to share it.
Do you want me to respond or?
Absolutely. Oh, happy to talk. I mean,
Yeah.
I am, Trevor.
So first of all, I just would just point out that you're talking about the experience of a small N, right?
Correct.
Of
One
drugs,
brand
right?
drug and
So
one
that
generic.
in aggregate, it could look vastly different, right? When you're comparing ArrayRx to GoodRx or any other discount card. And then also fee-for-service payment methodology is a completely different methodology of reimbursement to pharmacies. It is a Medicaid animal. It is something that needs to be called out as such. However, I do know
I only
that there
added
are
it because I was
jurisdictions.
thinking of
Yeah.
managed Medicaid, and if we
Yep.
pushed managed
Okay.
Medicaid into this and what I know about other states and managed Medicaid and
Yep.
what they're doing.
Yeah. So I think that having the knowledge that you have helps the conversation is that you can now, if you're making a recommendation, inform that recommendation to have some language that basically bakes into the recommendation pharmacy viability.
I tried, Trevor.
Yeah,
I tried over and over, but yes, you're right.
That's what I'm suggesting, right? Like, and that might look different than a fee-for-service methodology, but it might involve an ongoing third-party assessment of what the state's publicly managed PBM provides all pharmacies that are serving these entities. And that's not something that I think any of the steering committee is opposed to doing. And we recognize as a steering committee that there's room for improvement just in general to how pharmacies are reimbursed in order to curtail continued closures and also the downward pressure that has for decades been applied and I think reached a bursting point for our pharmacies across the nation.
Yeah, and that goes to the social determinants of health, part of our scale and our rubric and things. So thank you very much, Trevor.
Yeah.
Mr. Murray, I saw your hand was raised, so you have the floor.
Yeah, just quickly, I do want to say thank you to Trevor for the work that he's done to help maintain pharmacies, especially in critical access areas. We've been a frontier pharmacy for as long as the designation has been there, and we've been in business for 67 years. I recently had a question though from a 340B pharmacy in Eastern Oregon asking about applying for critical access pharmacy designation. After hearing the presentation, I'm wondering what benefit that would be when their dispensing fee is already higher or should be higher than anything even a frontier pharmacy could get.
That's a good question, John. Thank you for the question. I want to remind you that the CAP designation is something that lives in OPDP land, and then Medicaid adopts that designation and then treats the Medicaid part of their business on the fee-for-service side differently, right? So they have their own minimum dispense fee, which is the $20.68, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, plus the acquisition cost that they bill us for. Then the other business that 340B entity does, because they serve people that aren't Medicaid, right? That might include people that have a plan that is covered under OPDP. And so now that entity, that 340B pharmacy would be afforded the cap rates as opposed to the standard rates. And so that would raise their level of reimbursement, as you're familiar.
And I would add just briefly, there are some CCOs, I think pretty much all of them look at the critical access pharmacy list. They may not all adopt it wholesale, some of them do. And so there may be some benefit for, even if they don't participate in OPDP, there may still be a benefit to that 340B covered entity of getting on the list because it may improve their negotiations with the professional dispense fee with the PBM.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
I don't recall whose hand was up first, but you haven't spoke to this as recently. So Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, your hand is raised. You have the floor.
Yeah. Just so we make recommendations for our final reports every year, and I think in the prior years we've made recommendations about having like a single PDL across fee-for-service and the CCOs, and I've always thought it was about maintaining CCO's management of pharmacy benefits. And so, and I know we've had conversations in other venues about this issue, but can you refresh and just give me like the top 1 or 2 reasons why? And I always thought like having a single PDL, but managed across all the different CCOs seemed to be still clunky in terms of collection of rebate dollars and aligning kind of that whole issue. What's the top 1 or 2 reasons why we shouldn't consider something like complete carve out of pharmacy benefits with to have the full aligned PDL and also alignment of rebates and things like that in the Medicaid space?
Dee, do you want me to do it? I think I'm gonna have Dee do it, and then if I need to add to it, I will. Because Dee will nail this.
Well, I'll part of it.
If it's too much, I mean, we only have a couple minutes left. And I hated to like spin this out, but it just like bugs me.
Yeah. I mean, I would caution with you can have alignment in lots of different ways. One way that some states do is they have a full carve out. I will say that one big challenge of that is, well, there are 2 big challenges. One is if you're truly carving it out from the CCO capitation, then that means you would lose potential tax revenue because the
premium tax
or managed care premium tax. And then also they'd be required, reimbursements would be according to acquisition costs. So 340B, that's a huge impact to 340B covered entities who would not be paid. They would not get as much funding as they do currently from CCOs that pay their commercial rates and not their acquisition costs. But there are other ways to have more uniformity. For example, requiring them to observe a single statewide preferred drug list, or requiring a single pharmacy benefit manager. Those, I'm sure CCOs would have some strong opinions about, some CCOs would have strong opinions about that. And concerns I've heard include things like, we have arrangements with our communities. We know best what's best for our members, the membership that we represent. We are very good at creating very good advantageous rebate agreements through our PBM, can leverage and have some uniformity across their different plans, because they may not just be for the OHP program. They may have Medicare or commercial plans as well. And Trevor, you please pick up what I missed, because I'm sure
No,
there's
you did a
more.
great job. And I think that to add to the reasons why you would want a single PDL and with uniform coverage criteria is it simplifies things for patients, and the patient experience becomes seamless across the delivery system. And it also provides a reduction in the administrative nightmare to providers who specifically in hospital systems where specialists are oftentimes serving 4 or 5 different catchments of CCOs, and they're having to navigate 4 to 5 different PDLs and coverage criteria and coverage guidance. So it would simplify providers' lives, and it would provide a portable benefit that really strikes the chord with equity, at least for me, and in my mind it does, for the members that we serve, which I think is really important also to the PDAB.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's try to break the 12 o'clock
Oh gosh,
time and see.
Trevor, I wasn't even
Let's
looking
go.
at time. I'm so interested in
Let's
these
keep
topics.
asking questions. This is fun.
Well, and we must be mindful of that, because I think we have to have a motion to extend the meeting. Does anyone have any more questions of Trevor and Dee? I would like to make it not so many years before we see you again, right? I think we all learned a lot. You can tell from the questions that we had a lot of comprehensive dialogue.
I know that both Dee and I are happy to come back at any future time, and happy that it was helpful to everybody here today.
I think especially related to our policy discussions, I think that both of you can add a lot to helping us talk through some of those, when we're having those conversations. Your lens and your information just will help us greatly.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, with me seeing no further hands raised, I do want to announce that the next PDAB board meeting is on Wednesday, May 20th, 2026. As a reminder, it will be at 8 a.m. Pacific. So please mark your calendars for 8 a.m. Pacific as opposed to the time we met today. So with there being no further business before the board, all in favor of adjourning the board meeting, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed, please say no. All right. See everybody next month. Thank you.